All right, folks, welcome to our next structural classification of joints, which are going to be cartilaginous joints. So just like the name suggests, these are going to be bones bound by cartilage. It's going to be specific cartilage, which is going to be hyaline cartilage and fibrocartilage, okay? Now remember, hyaline cartilage and fibrocartilage are tough yet flexible. So like fibrous joints, cartilaginous joints are going to be structurally stable, but have, of course, limited movement. Because remember, inverse relationship. The more stable a joint, the less movement. The more movement, the less stable. And there are going to be two types of cartilaginous joints we go over, synchondroses and symphyses. Now, let's start off with synchondroses. These are going to be cartilaginous joints where bones are bound by hyaline cartilage. And if you just look at the name, we see chondro. Syn means together. Chondro, we already know, has to do with cartilage. So that could just be one of your ways to remember that it has to do with cartilage. But you want to specify and think hyaline cartilage. Okay? Now, hyaline cartilage, if you remember, it has the ability to resist tension forces. So you want to kind of keep little details about that in mind. So you might just add details like, okay, resist tension forces. Or you can even go back to that chapter 6 to kind of get those details. Again, like we said before, and like was going to be continued to be said, is going to provide structural stability. I'm tripping today. And of course, no movement. So that means we're dealing with something that is synarthroses because of no movement. Okay? Like sutures, though, eventually some of these synchondroses bones may fuse to become synostosis. So syn means together. We know that osto means bone, so that means we're kind of forming a bony joint. Okay? So that means that hyaline cartilage can ossify or can be replaced by bone. Okay? Let's get a couple of examples here. First, let's orient ourselves. We're dealing with the femur here, and we're dealing with the first rib and the sternum. So we have our manubrium here, which is a part of our upper part of our sternum, and then we also have our first rib. All the other ribs have nothing to do with synchondroses, okay? So just keep that in mind. These are synovial joints. And they have a lot more movement because think about it. You have to be able to have movement if you are breathing in, your lungs are going to expand, or of course they're going to compress. So just keep that in mind. Okay, folks? But when it comes to the first rib that's attached to the actual sternum or the manubrium of the sternum, yes, we are talking about synchondroses. So what do we notice about our femur here? We see that we have hyaline cartilage that's still in the femur, and these are going to be at the epiphyseal plates, or again, you can call them growth plates. Okay, just like we saw before. Remember, we're saying that that's how we're going to be able to lengthen our bone. It's through those epiphyseal plates. But of course, as you grow, these particular epiphyseal plates are going to become bony joints. And so you'll just see them kind of just look fused, and they won't have all of the actual blue cartilage that you see here. We do see some articular cartilage, which, as we know, is going to be at the end of bone, but we're talking about the epiphyseal plates here in the femur. So these plates will end up just being ossified to straight up bone. Now let's look at the synchondroses between the first rib and the sternum. Again, we see our cartilage here, and that cartilage can again ossify and be replaced by bone. And that's going to give a lot of stability at that top portion of the actual sternum and with the first rib itself. Into our last cartilaginous joint, which is going to be symphysis, or you can say symphyses, which is going to be plural, okay? Now, here's the difference, and of course I'm looking at this because my name is Symphony, so I'm like, yeah, I kind of understand this part. But what we've noticed is that we've been talking about syn, and that is ending with the N, right, which means together. This is changing it to syn, okay? So that N and that M is going to be interchangeable. And also, we're talking about fis, that PH here, and that PH sounds like an F. And sometimes just breaking down the words or like little pieces of the words can help you with memorization as well. So symphyses are going to be cartilaginous joints in the body's midline. See how we replace it with M? Where the bones are bound by fibro, F sound, cartilage. So that's how we're just kind of breaking that down there. All right, so again, fibrocartilage is designed for strength and flexibility, but this time it is going to allow a little movement. So we are thinking of something as amphiarthrosis. Fibrocartilage, as we know, is going to be compressible. It's really resilient and flexible, and it's going to allow the symphyses to act as a shock absorber. So we'll talk about a couple of those examples here. First, let's talk about, looks like our cervical vertebrae. Not the atlas and the axes, but everything below that. So not C1 and C2, but of course C3 to 7. Okay. And over here we have our pelvic cavity, right? So we definitely see our pubic symphyses of the pelvis as well. Now, these are intervertebral joints in the spine, as we know. We're just specifying cervical vertebrae because that's what they have pointed out here. Now, what do we see? We see fibrocartilage. And because we see fibrocartilage and we know that it allows a little movement, that's the reason why we can move back and forward, put FWD, for our spine. Now, think about this. If we're talking about just two vertebrae, in between two vertebrae, and you have fibrocartilage, they have the ability to move backwards and forward, right? A little bit of movement when it comes to this fibrocartilage. But if you're allowing all the joints of the vertebrae to stack up, then of course that's going to give the spine more movement overall. It's kind of like that additive effect. Yes, between one vertebrae, you have a little movement forward and back. But of course, when you have all the rest of the actual vertebrae coming together to form the overall spine, you get way more movement. Okay, folks? Now let's go ahead and look at our pubic symphysis of the pelvis. Now, when it comes to this, we got to think of it always being amphi, because we're talking about amphiarthrosis. So amphi means both. That means it has movement in both directions usually, or both sides. And so our pubic symphysis here, amphi or both for the pelvis, we got to think about the pubic symphysis here. It's really only going to allow very slight movement from the left and the right here, so that the pubic bones can shift when you're walking, and also, of course, during childbirth. You want to be able to have some type of movement so that when the child is going through the actual cavity, the pelvic cavity, then it's not going to be any issue there. It's not going to be so immovable that it's going to cause breakage, okay? To sort of end our cartilaginous joints video, here is some images from your textbook for synchondroses and also symphyses. And so we see our vertebrae here. Again, we see the pubic symphysis, and we also still see our epiphyseal plates here, and we definitely see our manubrium and our first rib. So just keep those in mind. Again, you can go into your textbook and get a lot of information. As we go along and we start talking about synovial joints, we'll have more information from the textbook visuals as well. See you in the next video.